All right, so this is our first video on hypothesis testing basics. We're looking at homework 8.2, question number 3. And the question reads, in a study of 801 randomly selected malpractice lawsuits, it was found that 470 of them were dropped or dismissed. Use a 0.05 significance level to test the claim that most medical malpractice lawsuits are dropped or dismissed. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write down the number n, which is equal to 801. That's the total number of lawsuits. And then the number x is equal to 470. So that's the number that were dropped or dismissed. Then I'm going to write down alpha is equal to 0.05 as our significance level. And then, so the wording here, test the claim that most are dropped or dismissed. So what most means, it means greater than half. Okay? So remember, the null hypothesis is always, and what are we looking at? We're looking at proportions here, right? So the null hypothesis is always a statement of equality, right? So we're going to say the null hypothesis is equal to P for proportion, population proportion. Because remember, that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to take some data and we're trying to estimate what is going to happen with the population based on the sample. That is the entire point of inferential statistics. All right, so our null hypothesis is going to be that the population proportion is equal to 0.5. And then our alternate hypothesis is that it's going to be greater than 0.5. So let me just show you what I've written down. So right now I'm just extracting data. All right, we have x is 470. And by the way, we could get p hat too, right? P hat is just going to be x divided by n. Like how many out of 801 were dismissed? So that would be 470 divided by 801. And that's, we'll say 0.587. All right, we'll say 0.587. So I'm just going to take note of what p hat is as well. And then it's actually approximately 0.587, right? That's why I use those little squiggly equal signs. All right, so back to the problem at hand. All right, so what is the test statistic? Okay, so this idea of a test statistic, we're looking to see if we have more than half of the lawsuits are dropped or dismissed. We get some data, 470 out of 801 were dropped or dismissed, and that's 0.587. So this leads us to believe that the alternate hypothesis may be true. But how do we determine that to be true, right? So, well, we're going to find a test statistic. So how do we find a test statistic? All right, so let's open up StatCrunch. Let me get this open here. All right, so remember I have all that information written down, and I can take that information and I can use that. So we're going to go to stat. Now we're going to go to proportion stats. This is the same place you went for confidence intervals. Then we're going to go to one sample, and we have a summary. Very rarely do we actually have raw data in this course. So we're going with the summary. The number of successes that I've written down is 470. The number of observations, or the total number of cases we looked at, was 801. And we want to select hypothesis test, not confidence interval. That's already selected, so we'll leave it selected. And then our Our null hypothesis is that P is equal to 0.5. Our alternate hypothesis is that P is, we have to change this to greater than 0.5. And then I always include the critical value and the significance level. It will default to 0.05. If it's something different, you have to click this and change it. So now I'm going to hit compute. All right. And here we have our results. And this is, in fact, everything that we need to know. We have our number of successes here. What we're testing, the population proportion, number of successes out of the total number, our sample proportion p hat, standard error, our z statistic, which is 4.91. I'm going to write that down. So this is our test statistic. So I'm going to write that down. It's equal to 4.91. I'm also going to write down our critical value. That's 1.64 approximately. All right, so we're going to write down our critical value. And then we have a p-value that's less than 0.0001. And as a general rule of thumb, if the p is low, the null must go. In other words, a low p-value suggests that we should reject the null hypothesis. And look, and here's, I've entered all the numbers here, 4.91, 0.000, like that's a very low p-value. That's less than our significance level of 0.05. If the p is low, the null must go. If the p is lower than the significance level, then we reject the null hypothesis. And then the final conclusion is that we have sufficient evidence to support the claim that most medical malpractice lawsuits are dropped or dismissed. Okay, so that concludes this lesson.